If we shadows have offended, well, that's too bad for now because we are going to spend another week talking about something Shakespeare adjacent, and this time with Shakespeare a lot more present. Last week we talked about Birnam Wood by Eleanor Catton, which was a play on the idea of Birnam Wood from Macbeth, and today we're traveling back into Shakespearean London with That Selfsame Metal by Brittany and Williams. This, as I mentioned in my anticipated for the month video, I was obviously anticipating, but this doesn't come out if you were watching this on the Friday it was put out. It doesn't come out until Tuesday. My library did indeed process this early for me. They were like, Melody, we know you've been going through a rough time. If you promise to bring this back, we'll get it to you early. Because that's how libraries work, not because I'm anything special. But this book was just as much of a delight as I anticipated. It follows Joan, a teenager in Shakespearean London during the reign of James I, and she is what we would contemporarily call a fight coordinator, and she is also the weapons master for the company. Her brother, her twin brother James, is an apprentice for one of the actors in the company, but from our opening scene, which is very action-focused and action-driven, where she is kind of rehearsing this fight choreography with a bunch of the people in the company who are kind of closer to her in age, the apprentices, the younger members of the troupe, but she is very well respected by both those in her peer group and those older than her. And in addition to being this part of Shakespeare's company, she also has the ability to form metal or to manipulate metal. And this power has been bestowed on her due to her connection with the Orisha Ogun. And all of her family have connections to different Orisha, and her parents are renowned or respected merchants within this society. Her father owns a metalworking, a goldworking business, and part of Joan's main concern at the outset of the novel is that she is not able to inherit this business. So her father has this apprentice that's kind of tanking the reputation of this shop, and Joan kind of sneaks in and does what she can, but she kind of believes that she's going to marry this guy or is going to position herself to potentially marry him in order to be able to have some connection with the shop still and her family legacy and the skill that she possesses. However, that doesn't stop her from having a crush on one of the apprentices in Shakespeare's company. Nor does it stop her peers in the company for both teasing her for this current crush and for this dalliance with another apprentice's sister she'd had the summer before. So she is sent on an errand at the outset of this book as they're kind of transitioning from this fight rehearsal, and she's essentially being sent to pass on this trinket. And in the meantime, she runs into her godfather, who is set to have a meeting with James I about a pact with the Fae that is due for renewal. There is a sense that the time is running out on something, and as they are having this discussion and Joan goes off, her godfather is arrested. And as Joan is watching this, she sees that one of the people arresting her godfather is in fact a Fae. She sees this Fae transition from one persona to another. And additionally, her powers give her the ability to recognize Fae out in the open. They kind of glow. And so now we have the breakdown of this contract when her godfather goes missing and the Fae are able to enter London and start causing mischief. And Joan is standing in the way of some of this mischief, and that puts her on the radar of Oberon. Yes, Oberon, not Oberon. And then she is basically setting out to kind of have to battle or face this all-powerful Fae. And the Fae can only be wounded in a way that will stick by iron, in a way that makes her skill very important. And in the meantime, the Fae are causing havoc all over the city in a very dangerous way. These are dangerous Fae, and it's very interesting to see how we kind of play with this idea of the Fae, especially in Midsummer, because there's no way to talk about fairies and Shakespeare without directly referencing Midsummer, but we're not necessarily being caught in the weeds of Shakespeare here, which I appreciate. There are a lot of references to things that people who know and appreciate Shakespeare will appreciate, and if you're a young adult reader who is not as familiar with Shakespeare potentially, I believe it gives you enough of the flavor of it to still appreciate it without it feeling overwhelming, and in a way, I think it actually makes it a lot more approachable. It brings it to life. We got this idea of the dance at the end of a performance. There is this real sense of camaraderie within the troupe. There is a vibrancy to everything here. And it's exactly what I loved about historical fiction as a young reader when I was reading things of this time and this era as a young adult reader, in that it felt like we were getting to explore the world with Joan. But the way the Fae are built out here both pays direct homage to the play and directly kind of plays with the idea of how those Fae came to be, while also making them malevolent and a little dangerous. It almost reminded me of, one, the Fae and Karen Marie Moning, which isn't necessarily going to be as appropriate for the audience of this book, but also because the author is in theater, which I know because the book told me so, it made me think of The Skriker by Carol Churchill, which deals with a lot of heavier themes and uses the Fae and these kind of creatures that we mythologize to talk about some of the scariest things of human nature, to explore that. But here we have this kind of bleeding and blending. We have this idea that the Fae in Shakespeare are kind of this watered down version of what we're seeing, even as they are still obviously very powerful in the play. But we built out this idea of the Fae and how they operate within this version of Shakespearean London. And sure, some liberties have been taken even in that exploration, I am sure, but I was so engaged with the story, I was having so much fun that I wasn't interested, I didn't care about fact-checking. It felt like it drove the story where it needed to, and the novel wasn't proposing Oxfordian theories, so it was A+ in my book in terms of kind of the historical bit. But there were a couple of small bits before I jump in full-fledged to the Fae of it all that did do a little bit of a record scratch. The first one being, when I say that Shakespeare is a character, he is a full-fledged active participant in this story, which was so incredibly fun. But for a small spoiler, so just fair warning if you care about that, toward the end of the book, it is revealed that Shakespeare has connection with Orisha powers as well because his mother was Black. Now, this is most interesting in context of what it didn't really grapple with in terms of Othello with that, because Othello is played out in the book and is used to kind of parallel some racism that Joan is facing with the Queen when the company is performing for the King and the Queen, and Joan is called to kind of wait on the Queen and all of the, not even microaggressions, the overt aggressions she faces with the Queen and her ladies. And it directly explores the idea of Othello, but I also thought that that was a really important and really subtle exploration of racism, especially because the explorations of racism in this book are definitely there, but they are very much tied to Joan's exploration of this world and how she interacts with this world. And in a world where we get to see her claim and own a lot of her own power within the circles we see her operating within. So there is this really kind of intricate exploration. But that's one of the interesting things I think it's exploring in terms of how it's setting up Shakespeare in this world and then what that means. However, I believe we've really just scratched the surface of a lot of these explorations. And again, this is a very propulsive, plot-driven novel, and plot in the sense that we're getting to explore this world, like I said, but also how we're following Joan on her adventures, on her quest. Even the romance that's sprinkled throughout is kind of just for extra flavor. It's not necessarily a driver so much as it is a way for Joan to kind of explore what she wants out of life. And again, I think we're going to see all of these plot points explored a lot more actively as this series continues. It was a real expert setup, I think, because we did have this very immediate direct conflict with Oberon, but we again got to explore the world very organically with Joan, got to know the people around Joan, and we got to get a feel for her relationships, especially her brother. So I think that that's setting a really strong foundation for a series of this nature, especially because we do have this darker exploration of the Fae, which I promise I'm circling back to, but the tone of the book is still kind of light in some ways. It is still obviously dealing with bigger themes. There is death, there is a lot of violence in this. We obviously have these explorations of racism and class, but there is still this kind of lightness in some ways to the voice and to the tone as well, which goes back to it being active and propulsive and us getting to explore this world with Joan, which I also think goes back to the author having a theater background, being involved in theater currently, because then we have this exploration through action, whether it be through dialogue and the characters, how the characters are interacting with each other, what is going on in this fight against Oberon, what have you, but we are getting to reveal things that way. But that history in theater is also so welcome in the way that it translates to the vibrancy around the globe and theater at this time, the clear love for the idea of theater at this time and how it was accessible to the masses in this form of entertainment and escapism, and just how we saw the company having fun with it. But then we have these tinges of danger that are creeping in with the Fae, and it is the real dangerous, like I said, version of the Fae. And it still has that overlap with the Midsummer Night's Dream, even though we're not setting up rulers of the fairy realm in this, and it very specifically says that Oberon was not a king. We definitely have this idea of allegiances, of fairy tricks, this idea of not saying thank you to the Fae because then you owe them something down the line. And I think we all know it's not necessarily a great thing to be indebted to the Fae, but the Fae here are not kind of the Fae of the kind of more romantic tinge that we've been exploring in a lot of fiction, and which I love too, don't get me wrong, but it is the Fae that will leave you dancing till morning until your feet are bleeding. And we're seeing this contrasted against the Fae in A Midsummer Night's Dream, and Oberon is not the only member of that play to make an appearance. This is one of my only other like minor qualms, or the things that kind of took me out of it for a second, in that Joan supposedly has A Midsummer Night's Dream memorized to the point where she can jump in for Hermia at a moment's notice, or when her brother can't go on. And yet when she first meets Puck, who introduces themselves first as Robin Goodfellow, it takes her a second to catch up, even though Puck is also referred to as Robin Goodfellow within A Midsummer Night's Dream. And later in the book, I believe they introduce themselves as Robin Goodfellow again. And we have this kind of internal moment with Joan while she's waiting for this other character to catch on, because of course Robin Goodfellow and Puck are the same person. So just kind of like an internal logic kind of kerfuffle there for me, but that could also just be me. And so we're kind of watching these characters bleed into reality. At one point, very literally in a kind of production of A Midsummer Night's Dream that goes terribly wrong, and the way that the Fae are brought into this world. We have red caps, we have Kelpie, and so there is a real sense of danger. And this danger is kind of underlined structurally with these interlude chapters, which sometimes still give us peeks of Joan as it overlaps with the action of the main piece, and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's just a way for us to watch havoc being wreaked by the Fae. As we get further into the book, it's definitely setting up a lot more. We get a surprise Guy Fawkes appearance, because why not? We get a hint about a betrayal that's going to happen, this kind of dramatic irony moment due to a fairy thrall that we will then see play out within the main action. And so it is this sense, it's building out the world of the Fae a little bit more, because we are seeing Joan interact mostly in these kind of fight or flight moments. And there is a lot of fight, to be fair, so we're seeing a lot of that action. We're seeing her face off against pixies, against redcaps, as I said. Those interludes seed a little bit more of the danger without revealing the full hand, because to be clear, I don't think we have even close to a full hand revealed. It all goes back to the kind of trickery and doublespeak and the way that Fae will twist words, and we don't know anyone's true intentions here. We just know about the breakdown of the agreement that is letting the Fae into this world, but what are their intentions? And that's a little bit more unclear. And amidst all of this, we have Joan and her responsibility and this power that she has, and this potential that she may be involved with this agreement if she can't find her godfather, or if they can't find her godfather. And all of this is kind of setting up for the rest of the series, because we have a resolution and not at the same time. And we definitely have Joan's exploration of her power, because we watch Joan kind of grapple this, especially as she's kind of facing off against the Fae. She feels herself being taken over more by her Orisha and losing control of her own body. And I actually would have loved to see that explored a little bit more, her being disconcerted by that, her struggling with that. We got a little bit of it, but some of it fell to the wayside to make way for the action. And it did actually become really important later, because there's a plot point directly related to that struggle and how she interacts with her power and belief, which Williams does mention in her author's note is a little fictionalized as well in terms of her interpretation and portrayal, particularly of the Orisha. So that's kind of the structure of the book itself in terms of like the plot and the characters, which are so much fun, like I said, to get to explore and discover together in this very active way. In terms of the structure, I only have like one really nitpicky qualm calm in that there are chapter titles, which at this point I haven't thought about in a while. I guess it's been a second since I've read a book with chapter titles. And for me, they really need to add something to what's going on, although I think here they're also being used as a summary in some ways of what's going on, or a kind of look ahead to what's going on. I don't want to fool you into thinking I have very strong opinions on chapter titles. However, I think here where we're so immersed in the world of Shakespeare, we mentioned multiple plays in this book already. We have Hamlet, we have A Midsummer Night's Dream, we have Othello right off the top of my head. I can't remember. I'm sure we talk about more, and I'm sure we'll talk about even more as we continue. However, I think that there was a missed opportunity in not naming the chapter titles as Shakespearean references, and maybe that's just the nerd in me, but I think that that would have been fun. That being said, I think that this book makes the world of Shakespeare a lot more accessible to young readers. I know A Midsummer Night's Dream I largely still consider one of my favorite Shakespeare plays because of its exploration of the fae and fairies, but it was also the first Shakespeare I ever read. I read it in 7th grade, and it was my first foray into Shakespeare, and I personally think Midsummer is an excellent first jaunt into Shakespeare, and I think that this book is an excellent kind of combining of the love of fairies and the fae and fairy stories right now with Shakespeare and the history of Shakespeare and Midsummer Night's Dream and all of the other plays that I believe this series is going to open up for us. And like I said, I think that it is making the world of Shakespeare and Shakespearean theater really fun and vibrant for young adult readers. And it's doing this through the blend of historical fiction and fantasy, but also just in the way, like I said, it's allowing us as readers to explore the world. And as someone who loved historical fiction growing up, this is the kind of historical fiction I gravitated toward, and I haven't seen it as popular as things like World War I and World War II recently, so I'm really excited to get these stories. And I think that this was just such a fun book that had such a fun, fast-paced plot while letting us really kind of explore a lot of bigger themes at the same time, and to get to explore this with a really fun protagonist, Joan, and I am so excited to continue exploring this world with her in upcoming books. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about any of this, whether you read the book or not. Maybe your library processed it a little early too. Otherwise, maybe you'll have some more thoughts after it comes out on Tuesday, but definitely encourage you to check this one out if you like historical YA, Shakespearean England, or books about the fae, which are, of course, very hot right now. So like I said, let me know what you're thinking. Thanks again, as always, for hanging out and listening to my thoughts. Like and subscribe if you feel like it. Read something good, and yeah, bye.